everyone. I'm your host, Dominique.
And I'm Christina, and we are the Connected in Glass podcast.
This podcast is meant to be an educational and inspirational podcast about glass art for all listeners. A love of glass art connects people of all walks of life and in all generations. Let us celebrate this by getting to know each other. Each interview will have 3 sections: getting to know this week's artist, diving into more detail about their particular form of glasswork, and going into the deep stuff that isn't usually openly discussed. These are meant to be real-life coffee table discussions about hopes, dreams, and aspirations. We hope that with every episode, you'll be left with a sense of connection, a new perspective, and maybe a boost of creative mojo to tackle your next aspiration.
Today, we're interviewing Lindsy Marshall. Lindsy has been working with glass since 2013. Today, she shares with us what it's like growing up with a dad who's a painter, her experiences with teaching, and finding her own voice in glass. Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
So today, we just wanted to kind of touch base with you and learn a little bit about you and kind of start off with how your life started before you got into glass and kind of lead us into how glass became your world.
Yeah. So I actually grew up with my dad painting around me, like kind of my whole life. So I always remember just like having like large paintings and just kind of like his paintbrushes and all these like crusted palettes all around my house, which was just like such a textural and like profound, I think, like memory for me when I was younger. And so from like that, just kind of being like my dad painting around me all the time, when I went to high school, I was just like super lucky because they had a really nice art program. And it was kind of like you were either going to be a sports kid or an art kid or a music kid. And I didn't really know where I was for a long part of the time. So I was just kind of like, I am going to be in this niche because I've always been kind of like dabbling and it kind of fit in right for the way my brain worked. And that's kind of just like me playing. I never really thought it was going to go anywhere. And I'm super family oriented too. So like my dad kind of being in my life and just painting all the time, I think just really kind of put in my brain that like art is a really great way to just like be yourself. And that's, I think, kind of like where I began my small journey. Other than art, I guess like I really do love like thrifting. And I think like thrifting is a large part of like my artistic perspective as well. And then like I guess just like another little fun fact is most people know this, but I am like a huge Halloween nut. So anything like I think like old cinema of like Halloween and just like all those old horror movies, but also just like cinema in general is like so beautiful. And I think like that has also just been like such a way for me to find my art career and just like what I love.
Cool.
Yeah. And so when did you kind of discover glass, or how did you kind of get into that realm?
Yeah. So it's a little weird. I always find it kind of funny, but my dad actually took me to a Jehuli exhibit at the MFA. It was like, I forget what year it was, but it was, I think back in like 2008 or I don't know, something a long time ago. And that was kind of my first reaction to large scale sculpture glass. And I was just kind of like, wow, this is unique and amazing. I didn't know you could even do that or that people thought this was cool. And from that kind of idea, I guess when I was applying to colleges, I was looking at different schools that had glass as a program just to kind of like try it out. And yeah, Massart just kind of like fit in perfectly for me. I knew I didn't want to go too far, and I felt like comfortable with going to the city, being in a smaller school, and I just heard so many good things about their community. So it just seems like such a good fit that one, I heard those things, and then two, they had a glass program. And then I basically just kind of like took one class and kind of weaseled my way into it.
So what year was that you went to Mass Art?
So I went to Mass Art in 2013. That was my freshman year that I went there. And I graduated in 2017.
And was that the first time that you ever started touching glass?
Yeah. So that was my first interaction at all, like fresh baby, brand new. It was a crazy experience. I will admit, my two TAs basically made everything for me that year, but that's okay.
That's how we all start.
Exactly.
So you went to Mass Art knowing that you wanted to do art, but you didn't really necessarily go to Mass Art knowing that you wanted to do glass.
Yeah. I thought I was actually going to be a printmaker, which is really funny. And I actually still love printmaking to this day. If I'm ever able to have the access to it, I'm like, gotta get hands on it.
Cool.
And then, so you spent some time in Pilchuck, right?
Yeah. So this is actually kind of like a funny story, but Mass Art was actually supposed to go to Turkey in 2016. And so I basically like figured out the money to make my way to join their like basically to go to Turkey with the glass program, and it was going to be like an amazing experience. I was really excited for it, but things were kind of iffy with the government and just with what was happening over there. So actually the trip never happened. But so all of us basically had like this 500 like check that just got handed back to us. And so I basically was like, wow, I'm just going to apply and see if I can get into a class. And it just kind of like worked out that I got into a class that I really wanted, and that I had the money also at the time. So I guess like one door closes and another door opens.
Yeah, totally.
So I know Christina took a class with you, so she has a better idea of your style and range of work, but I haven't really, and I did keep your Instagram a little, but for people that haven't seen your work yet, could you maybe verbally describe your style and your range of glass work?
Yeah, of course. So I would say my range is kind of a little plethora of everything. I really love to dabble in glass blowing as well as kiln working and a little bit of flame working. And I think magic really happens when you melt multiple of them together. So I think for me, my aesthetic is really like the investigation of glass material and then like figuring out ways to play and like kind of break the boundaries of what most people are telling me what we can do with glass. And so I think like my aesthetic kind of comes out to be more of like a textural type of glass, something that doesn't really look like glass when you first take a glance at it. And I think it kind of makes people question, and hopefully dive deeper into just investigation of material process.
That was beautiful.
Oh,
So when you're doing this, are you typically doing things alone? Do you work as a team? Do you do a little bit of both?
yeah, I definitely do a little bit of both. I'm definitely like a social person just naturally. I think it's just easier for me to have like a good time while I'm making anything. So like in the hot shop, I always love to have, honestly, like I always pick like the funnest people I can to blow glass with, just because like sometimes it can get really stressful in there, and I'm not about that. So when I'm like working the hot shop, I do always like to have a team around me. But typically when I'm making my kiln work, I am doing it alone. A lot of the stuff that I do make, I think I make it like in parts, honestly. So I'll like go in and I'll make a bunch of like little small mixtures of other combinations, and then I'll come in another day and I'll mix more, and then I'll put like all of those in the kiln together, and then I'll like pick those back up in the hot shop or remelt them back down. So I feel like it's always kind of varying, I guess, depending on like what my idea is or how I'm like feeling in the moment, I guess.
So can you tell us how you make your living? Like, do you do glass full time? Do you live off of the art that you make and sell, or?
I'm kind of a little bit of both. I definitely don't make a living off of my work yet. I wish I could. But
Dream.
right, I know I'm like all of us are like dreams. We can in time, in time.
Yeah.
I'm
We're
feeling
on the path.
actually. But so for a really long time, I've always kind of been in the service industry. I kind of just use that as like a fallback, just in case, because things are always varying in the glass world, whether or not we're busy. But I did just come out of the residency for 2 years, so I was teaching, and that was kind of how I was making my money, as well as kind of making my own work to sell at craft fairs. But right now, I actually am working more full time for the Bubble Factory. And they've been doing so well that have actually been able to open up a storefront. So I think because they've been doing so well, I've been able to kind of make my life a little bit more full time glass in a sense. And it's not always like glass blowing, but it is kind of like how to sell a product, how to be a part of that, how to market to people. Yeah, but not so much my work that I'm making the money off of.
So do you mostly teach there? Do you do production style work? What do you do with them?
So I mostly do production with them, and I'm just the assistant. I'm not a gaffer, but so I do production with them, and then I also work in their store. But yeah, I do teach very sporadically.
So so you get inspired by the manners in which you can push the different materials that you're working, right?
Yes.
Kind of.
Yeah, I think my inspiration comes from like how to push the materials, but I think like in reality it really comes from like this stem of like honestly this like cycle of life that we're all kind of confronted with like every day, whether it be through nature or just in general. I think like we go through our daily lives through a kind of like transition to destruction, and I think that is something I'm really interested in, and I'm figuring out ways to connect like our human interactions and our human emotions of how we are living like in the natural world through, I guess, material study, if that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like when I first started making glass, like I made this one video piece, and I think like that honestly really triggered me and the way I think about material making, which is it's basically a video process of just baking soda in glass as it bubbles, but it basically bubbles really intensely obviously as it's hot, and then it basically freezes and then is as we would consider it the glass piece. But I think for me, I was so interested in that like process where like, yeah, we're totally working with this like alive material, and it's like more of the maker than we are. And we're kind of just like figuring out how to work with her. And I think like that to me is the magic. And I've kind of always been trying to like capture that, I guess.
Cool. That's such a unique perspective because we've talked to a lot of people that are makers, kind of like they make a product, and we've also talked to a lot of people that are artists in their own way, but the process is your art versus the end result necessarily, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. And I think like I mean I've struggled with that like in my past of like, people in critiques always being like, well, I can't see that when I'm looking at the piece. So I've always tried to figure it out like how to keep moving in that direction and like portray people. Like if only I could like have, like a crazy video process of like to pull people in with me. So I know there's like, so much more for me to figure out and move towards than what I'm doing with my art right now too, which is pretty cool.
So you mentioned that sometimes glass doesn't meet the weight of all your financial obligations. So then you go into the service industry and you kind of go back and forth in that. And I think that's a really interesting note to touch upon, is that not all glass artists do glass full time. Could you maybe just like enlighten us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. Because I have kind of been pretty aloof with all my jobs, I'm kind of the person people call when they need extra pair of hands. But normally I've never really been full time anywhere. So for me, I've always had these like month-long periods where I'm just broke. And for me, I think it's so important to understand that I'm still an artist while I'm figuring out how to make my money elsewhere. And like, even though in that time it makes me feel a little depressed because I could be using my knowledge that I have and I'm not. But I think it's so important because like in the life we live now, it's almost physically impossible to make it as they want you to think. And I think like it's so important to like kind of struggle with multiple different jobs because like that's the normal way, I think, especially like not always having that glass job because like it makes money, you know. It's such a sad thing to admit, but I mean we all have to pay rent, we all have to pay for our careers too, our artistic careers, which just kind of is like a part of it, I guess.
And
Yeah,
glass is not cheap.
Yeah, glass is not cheap. No.
Totally. And like I honestly like I'm starting to be in a different studio and it's like now I'm being in my own studio all by myself. Like I realized, yeah, you have to buy everything, every little tool, like all these things, you know, and it's like, wow, like, yeah, like being your own artist, like totally costs just so much just to buy tools, not even like the glass itself. So yeah.
I know. Okay, so we all talk about making it. What would your definition of making it be in your perfect world, just for curiosity's sake?
Yeah, no, honestly, I struggle with a lot because sometimes I'm like, oh, I think making it would be like being in a bunch of galleries and having like people to be able to have the conversations about my work the way I want the conversations, like that, like I'm not getting because my work's just in boxes. So like for me, I'm always like, oh, it seems so easy to be like success is being in galleries and having people know your name. But then I also think about that too. And I'm like, I have been in galleries and you know, and like people do know my name slightly. It's like it feels like such a funny thing because I don't think as I grow older, I don't think success is such a trajectory line like I used to think it was. And now I think it's like the little moments where someone that like buys my piece or that like tags me in something on Instagram that looks like my art, you know, like to me, I'm like, oh, wait, like that's actually success in making it because like people are thinking about me without me like even there or thinking about my art in a different way. And I think like that is really what success is. And it's so hard because like, I mean, we're all, you know, we all are artists. So I think depression and anxiety comes so aligned with our lives. So it's so hard when you are feeling so down to be like, no, 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 like those small moments are what's it. Like it's like those small moments are the happiness, are what are who we are, and are like our success. But it's so hard to remind and like keep that in our brains, I guess.
Just acknowledge it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like you see someone else doing something or where they're at and you're like, oh wait, I should be doing that too. Or like, oh my God, like I'm so happy for them. Like, oh my gosh, like how do I join and be a part of that? Or like how do I get to that point? And then I'm like, wait, Lindsay, no, no, no. Like you'll get there at your own time and pace. So it's like all these weird moments where I'm like, wow, I see someone else's success. And my first reaction is like, oh my God, like how do I get there? But then it's like I take 5 seconds back. So I'm like, no, no, no. Like I'm so happy for them, and I'll get there at my own time. Because like we're all unique humans, and like nothing's a straight line.
Yeah, and they probably have challenges that you're not even aware of that maybe you've made through already.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like humans are so weirdly multifaceted in that sense where it's like you have absolutely no idea. And I think that's also what makes everyone's art so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, it's so funny.
I think social media kind of contributes to that too, because everybody puts just like the perfect thing there. And you're like, wow, scrolling through their feed and you're like, everything in their life is so perfect. That's everything I could ever want. But then you don't see all of those months where you're just broke or, you know, you don't see any of the messy stuff.
No, you are so right. Honestly, I am totally someone that's like that. It's like, the best part, I went back to work after quarantine, and I turned to like my best friend, and I'm like, yeah, like, wow, whew, that was rough. And she was like, wow, well, like through your Instagram, you'd have no idea that you struggled so hard, like mentally. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's not good. You know, it's like such a facade, and I don't mean to. And I think that's something we're so capable of, exactly like what you said, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe like too, sometimes it's just that we're so vulnerable in our art that it's almost like, why do we need to be vulnerable in all these other ways?
Yeah. And you're vulnerable just by putting yourself out there in the first place, by just making those posts. You're already putting yourself out there to the trolls. So if you get too in depth with your typing and your text, then you never know what will come out.
No, it's so true. And sometimes I even feel that way too, like when I'm teaching, I'm like, oh wow, like what if it's like sometimes I have dyslexia, so sometimes I have like a small speech slur or like little small impediment, we'll say. And so like sometimes when I'm teaching, I'm so afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing and that someone's going to judge me, or that I'm like failing, or that because I said this one word that is silly, they're all of a sudden not going to think I don't know the knowledge that I have. Like Christina, when I taught your class, like I'm always so scared before I teach. And then I like sit down with my students. I'm like, oh my God, these people are amazing. And I'm like, I just made like the best friends I could ever have. Like, why am I so afraid of how people will react to me, in a sense? Which is
relate to that a lot too, though. Like also from teaching, you like work yourself up in this weird headspace where you're like, I know how to make this thing and I know how to teach this thing, but what if I do it wrong?
Right. And it feels like you're like, oh my God, I'm failing.
Could you talk a little bit more about teaching? Because we've talked to two other people that teach, but I just think it's interesting to hear perspectives on it. So you're making your art and you're working with the material, but instead of making your art, you're teaching students how to use the material you love. And how does that change your mind, your headspace, and how do you approach that?
That's a great question. I do think it changes like my headspace completely differently, because the way I handle a lot of my problems is like, oh, whatever, like let's just see what happens. And I think as a teacher, I've had to be like, oh wow, no, let's question that and let's figure out the solution to why that didn't work in the kiln, or why that mold broke, or even in the hot shop to be like, oh, like let's actually make a decent cup when you don't know how to gather glass. So I think like as a teacher, it totally has made me be like, I have had to problem solve. And I think as a learner, you have to problem solve, but it's in like a completely different way. It's more like loosey goosey. And in the end, it only hurts me if I did it the wrong way or not. But I think as a teacher and an educator, we're all kind of like, wow, I do want to completely help you see this material and understand it in the way that I understand it, which takes a whole learning curve, I think, as teachers, because like we learn and then we kind of get it and it's like muscle memory, and then we just like know the way things happen, the way they happen, and can fix them. So I think as like teachers, you really have to like kind of take a couple steps back, but it's so difficult to do because you're also so in the moment with glass, whether it be in the hot shop or even mold making. Like things can go so wrong so fast, and you have to have these answers for people, and there's so many different answers.
It's such a responsibility rather than just, oh, well, I broke my piece. It's, oh no, you're responsible for their end result too.
Mm-hmm. And you're also like, wow, I love this person. They came to support me. They came to support my business. Like, you're like, I don't want to screw them over.
Yeah. You want to get them to get the most of it, and you want them to leave loving it just as much as you do.
Yeah. And like come back for more, so that, because like I always tell my students, I'm like, the first time is basically like the doorway, you know, and then I hope that you want to come back for more because you'll never get it just off that first go.
Totally.
I think that's something that's hard to convey in like experienced glassblowing classes too, is that like they always expect it to be easier than it is and everything to come out better. And they have all these grand expectations, and then they almost, it's not intentional, but it becomes, you feel like you have the pressure of making sure that their first thing is so pretty and that they love it. And it's a weird kind of balance to find because glass is such a challenging material.
I know. You're so right when you say the word pretty too. Everyone always wants the pretty thing, and you're like, it ain't gonna be pretty.
I think that kind of goes to like some of our more core challenges though as teachers. Like one of my things that I'm always struggling is the feeling that I'm not enough. So I'm not teaching them enough. I'm not passing enough on to them, or they're not happy with their end result because they need to practice a little bit more. But I automatically put it on me. So I think that's just an internal challenge to manage.
No, yeah, I think I relate a lot to that too, where it's like, oh wow, like how could I fix this to make it better for you too? It's like it does take this whole responsibility.
So I think before you touched on just briefly about how a lot of us artist types, we deal with depression and anxiety, and that's been a pretty good correlation with all the interviews that we've done. So, and that's definitely something Christine and I both struggle with. So I was hoping that maybe you'd be interested in sharing a little bit more about that from your personal perspective.
Yeah, of course. I do think it's something that I need to talk more about in general. I think like it is something that like I people don't mostly understand or like know. I think all of us do that just naturally with our own I like mental illnesses and just like how we feel with our own skin. But I think like especially with like working too, I think I get so stuck in my head where it really becomes this like anxiety thing. So it's like a lot of I know I can apply to these things or I know I have the skills to be a part of this job, but yet my anxiety or my basically this like fear of not being good enough kind of stops me. So it's kind of like I'm like a deer in the headlights and I have all the tools in front of me, but yet I won't do anything with them. And like I won't move forward, which I think just kind of creates me in this like uncomfortable hole. And it's something where like I feel like I'm such a high functioning person that no one really knows about it. So it's like I go about my life and I will keep doing my jobs and I'll go in and out of work and no one will ever know a thing. But like deep internally, it's like I can't make anything for myself because I feel so stuck in that sense. And then it's like it feels more so like I look around to the people around me and then I'm like, how are they moving so quickly, but yet I'm so slow? I guess is kind of like the best way I can describe it for myself.
Yeah, and then you just said you're so high functioning, so then other people are probably looking at you and thinking that you've got it all made when you've got that same struggle.
Yeah. So it does feel like so like it's such a weird thing because it also I think like with everyone it comes and goes so fast. Like sometimes I feel like I'm doing so good with just like getting my work done, eating regularly, sleeping regularly, like even just like life things like that. It's like I have it, you know, I'm like, oh, I've got this. Like I've got my systems. And then it's like, oh wait, no, you do not. So I think like for me too, the hardest part is like re-reminding myself it's like I'm not alone. And I think like I'm so used to being like a caretaker for so many people around me that I've just kind of not really thought about like how do I take care of myself. And I think like the most important things I've learned in the past years is like one, eating food like regularly has changed and helps me out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just like trying to find little ways to make art where it's like walking in the woods is a way of just breathing and having that be a form or making smaller things and not having it be so glass heavy too, I think is like, I don't know if like you guys feel this way, but sometimes I put so much pressure that I'm like this glass artist and that's who I need to be and what I need to make. But there's so many other ways of art making that I can express myself, and might be better for me when I am so like stuck in my anxiety that I can't leave my house and I just want to watch TV all day.
I
Things like
think that's a really good point because we're all glass artists and that's our way that we express ourselves, but we also do it for a living. So sometimes we box ourselves into saying this is the only way that we can be creative when sometimes it turns into work a little bit.
right. And I think like also too, it's like denying like so many other like amazing ways to like be expressive. Like recently I found I really love cutting up old newspapers because it's like you can make poems with all your words. And I think like for me that's like such a fun way to like one just like be creative, and then like two kind of like makes you feel what you're feeling in that moment. So I'm like, I highly suggest it.
That's really cool.
That is cool. I can definitely relate to the kind of boxing yourself in. When you're so kind of depressed, you take those moments of, I have a little bit of energy to be creative, and you kind of put this weird pressure on yourself, or at least I do. I put this weird pressure on myself where I'm like, oh, the only time I'm going to be creative is the next like hour and a half, probably. So I have to do it in glass so that I'm making my glass art page and maintaining my glass art business. But
Yeah, I
it's
totally.
so important to just be creative.
Yeah. No, I think like it's such a thing that we all relate to, but yeah, it's so sad because like I mean I know I don't talk about it as much as I should. But here we all are, and we're all like we feel this all together.
Yeah, little cry session, don't worry.
No, but, I mean, in all honesty, too. I mean, my mom's kind of amazing. She does have mental illness, but because she has that, she's always been really vocal about it. And she once gave like my sister this card, and it basically has like all of these famous people that have all this mental illness, and it's like Virginia Woolf, Abraham Lincoln, like Winston Churchill, like all these just like famous historical, obviously like Sylvia Plath's on there, just like so many people, but like it makes you realize like everyone that is amazing for their brain also has so much else that's going on too.
So let's say that there's somebody that's listening to this and they're totally feeling everything we're saying. The hints that you would give them is to just make some art, right? Make sure you're eating food. What else would you say to them?
I guess I
You're
would.
not alone.
Yeah, you're definitely not alone. And I think just like I'm going to do, that we should all pledge to be more open about our mental illness and how we're going through it, because I think like we're all secretly talking about it, but like only to one or two people. And like I think along with talking about it makes just like a weight lifted off of all of our shoulders. So like I know I'm going to start to pledge to do that more for myself and for everyone else, for anyone that's listening.
Being radically vulnerable.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, badass.
Some Brene.
Yeah. Also, I guess like my funny thing I would say too is like watch a sad movie. I'm someone where like I can cry, but like sometimes I just like really need a good sad movie to like bawl my eyes out to.
Just let it out.
Yeah, just let it out. Or like a sad podcast. Or this one, a happy one.
What do you think, Christina? Do you have any questions?
I've asked a lot of questions, but I don't know. Is there anything else that you kind of wanted to talk about or to bring attention to or anything?
I guess like one thing I think we've all kind of like touched upon it. It's just like you guys wrote it out, and I thought it was so important to say is like the imposter syndrome. So, like, I think my last tidbit would just be like, I think we all feel the imposter syndrome so hard. And I think it's basically been like this thing with society to make us feel like we are less. Because if we all, like, I know myself as like, if I just do it, even though I'm telling myself I'm not good at it, I know I end up doing really well. So I think, like, for me, I'm just like, we all know it exists, but we should all realize it is a huge, huge lie to ourselves because we are all like not an imposter, even though we feel it all the time.
We're all worthy.
Yeah. And like we're all so unique. Like that right there is beautiful.
If you're listening, go do the thing.
Go do the thing. We're behind you.
Like 100%. I know. I'm like, everyone always looked at my art and was like, this is weird. Go be the weirdo. It's so much better to be like truthful to yourself.
I love it. This is beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been like wonderful for my heart.
This has been a little light in our lives. We've both been struggling and it's been really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been nice just talking and like realizing that we literally all are going through the exact same thing, especially like while there's collective trauma all happening around us. So we're all just feeling all the sads. And it's nice to know that everybody else is feeling it and there's ways through it.
Yeah. I also feel like so disconnected to the art world and to like meeting other art friends. And this is just like such a wonderful way to bring people together. So like one, even just like listening to the others that that you guys have put on too, is like, it's so cathartic because like we're together in a sense again, which is something we all really need. Connection.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Connected in Glass. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on the artists we interview and for updates on the podcast. You can find Lindsay's work at lindsaymarshallart.com and on Instagram as Lindsy Marshall Glass. That's LINDSYMARSHALL.